Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute here. Thanks for joining us tonight. So welcome, everybody, to the Educator Speaker Series, The Funds of Knowledge in the Arts, Tools for Learning from Students and Creating Culturally Relevant Practices in Our Classrooms. We will begin shortly. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Laura Schilling, and I am your host for the evening. My title at LACMA is Content Specialist for Teacher Programs. I'm a white woman with curly blonde hair, and I'm wearing a black sweater. The Educator Speaker Series is a LACMA program where we invite K-12 teachers to give presentations and workshops on topics in art education that center on criticality and social justice. We believe it is important to elevate the amazing work that teachers are doing and provide them a platform to share with their peers. Today, we are joined by artist, scholar, former LAUSD educator, and professor of art education, Dr. Luis-Genaro Garcia, who will be discussing how you can apply culturally relevant practices in your classroom through art. If you would like to access live captions today, please click Show Captions on the Zoom toolbar on your screen, which is most likely located near the bottom of your screen. And let's go to the next slide so that I can provide a land acknowledgement. LACMA recognizes that we occupy land in Los Angeles County, originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of the lands and waters in Los Angeles County. And you'll see on this slide, I've included the web address for nativeland.ca. I'll also go ahead and pop it in the chat right now. This is a really amazing mapping resource where you can see Indigenous lands across the globe. So definitely have a look when you can. Let's go on to the next slide. So before we get started tonight, I have one program and one resource that I want to share with you. The first is our Story Maps curricular resources, which we create for all of our Evenings for Educators programs, which is another program series that we do in addition to the Educator Speaker Series. The Story Maps highlight artworks in the collection as well as special exhibitions through short write-ups, discussion questions, and more. These are intended to be useful tools for integrating art into your classrooms. And I'm also going to put the link to those resources in the chat right now. I know a lot of you have used these before. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm also really excited to invite you to save the date for our next Evenings for Educators program, which will focus on women artists in our modern art collection. The program is going to take place on Tuesday, April 25th, and will include a lecture, dinner, and workshops. Tickets will go on sale in 1 to 2 weeks, so keep an eye out for an email about that or check back on the LACMA website. Next slide. It now gives me immense pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Luis-Genaro Garcia. Dr. Garcia is an artist, scholar, former LAUSD educator, and current assistant professor of art education at Sacramento State. His work as a scholar, educator, and artist spotlight the social and political barriers, past and present, that exist in marginalized communities. As an artist and former educator, he is influenced by critical education theory as a pedagogical tool that draws on the socio-political, cultural, and communal knowledge of students. His lectures and workshops focused on critical art education approaches have been presented through institutions like Self-Help Graphics and Art, the Getty, the California State University System, and the University of Arizona. He is a practitioner who engages with communities to build relationships and to best prepare pre-service educators and community advocates through the continued legacy of the Barrio Art program at Sacramento State. His work is housed in the collections of the Library of Congress, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and other university collections. Thanks so much for being here tonight, Dr. Garcia. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So hi, everyone. As Laura mentioned, my name is Luis-Genaro Garcia. I'm a professor of art education at Sacramento State. And prior to that, I am a homegrown Southern California boy. Experienced my educational trajectory as I will be talking about in a bit. But just 4 years ago, I moved up here to Sacramento with my wife after 14 years of teaching at my former high school, Thomas Jefferson High School in South Central Los Angeles. So one of the first things that I like to share is that as a former educator, I do acknowledge and understand the importance of resources. And because of that understanding, I developed this workshop that stemmed from my students' experiences. And so in this workshop, I'm going to be showing you how I've drawn on the funds of knowledge. I'm going to be introducing you to the theory of the funds of knowledge in hopes that you can use this as a tool to not only learn from your students, learn and accept their home knowledge as an academic knowledge to develop your lesson plans, to use them in conjunction with Common Core standards. Oftentimes, if we think about our own experiences in the K-12 setting, we should be thinking about the times that we felt disconnected to particular projects, subjects, or lessons. And so in this way, right, this workshop will be giving you some insight on how to draw on students' experiences, learn about their neighborhoods, learn about their home culture. And again, this is what the objective of this presentation is. So I've titled this presentation, The Funds of Knowledge and the Arts. It is geared towards educators that can use the arts in interdisciplinary ways. Subtitle, Tools for Learning from Students and Creating Culturally Relevant Practices in Our Classrooms. So I'd like to begin, by reminding everyone that we're going to be taking notes. So please make sure you have some paper, scratch paper, and a writing tool handy. We're going to be sharing some of our experiences. And I'm going to welcome you all to take notes on any ideas that come up based on the projects that I share, based on the activities that we're going to be doing in a bit. But to give you an idea of how I'm organizing this workshop, here's the overview. So first, we're going to do introductions through the chat. I'm going to discuss an art student's trajectory, my own positionality as to how I came to this work. I'm going to discuss some of the problems that I found through my own trajectory in art education research. I'm going to also suggest some questions we should be asking ourselves about our own teaching. I'm going to present some frameworks that I drew on, including the Funds of Knowledge framework and others, to something that I developed and I identified as creative resistance. Then we'll dive into the Funds of Knowledge. I'm going to show you some work samples on how I use students' Funds of Knowledge. And then we'll discuss where can we go from here. So with that said, I'd like to begin by sharing this work and by sharing that I came from a particular neighborhood with circumstances and hardships that you all as students, as educators, as community advocates may potentially work in. And so I do this so that you all can understand that our assumptions, our life experiences, and our values are what we understand as the experiences that informs the way we teach and the way we see our students. So one of the things that I like to show is this image. I'm going to go back. I like to show this image. It was the first time that I felt acknowledged as an artist. I was lucky that it happened to me when I was in the 6th grade. In the 6th grade, my principal called me into the office and I thought I was in trouble for stuff that I shouldn't be doing. But he sat me down and he said, Luis, a lot of your teachers over the years have told me that you're a talented artist. And I wanted to ask you if you would be willing to design the backdrop for your graduating class. And so what you see in the background is my first official mural. And this image was sent to me by my former elementary classmate and my high school classmate, Iris Rodriguez, who is standing right beside me, right? She's the girl in the pink dress. But she sent this to me when I was working on my dissertation at Claremont Graduate University. And as a researcher, right, I looked at this as a researcher after, kind of just admiring of how long she had this picture for. And I came to the conclusion, right, after looking at this image, that through my elementary education, I had a conflicting sense of my own identity, because despite me going to a school in South Central Los Angeles that was predominantly Latino and Black, I painted successful students as being light-skinned and blonde hair. And so as a teacher, a veteran teacher of, at this time I was teaching 10, 11, 12 years. And again, it just kind of made me think about what type of education was I getting that was giving me this sense of identity, an identity where I thought that successful students were blonde and had light skin. So as an artist, the unfortunate part about living in the inner city is that there weren't sustainable art programs in the schools that I went to. So in middle school, I was able to take a ceramics class. That really wasn't my medium, right? And so it wasn't until high school that I was able to take another art class. And so this is a picture of me and my siblings living in a single parent home in South Central Los Angeles. And I was the eldest in a single parent home at 16. I had learned how to drive, and I was already a junior in high school. I had a first period art class. And because of my responsibilities, right, I had to drop off my baby sister with a babysitter. I had to drop off my two siblings at the elementary. I had to drive my mom to work. And then I had to drive myself to school, only to get the last 15 minutes of my art class. And so as someone that was artistically inclined, unfortunately, that was my only opportunity to take an art class, because the A through G requirements in the state of California only require students to take 1 year of art for high school graduation. So when I requested, right, as an artist, when I requested to my counselor that I wanted to take more art classes, she said, well, you don't need it. You only need 1 year of art. Let's worry about a third year of science, a third year of math. I was supposed to take physics, and I'm like, no, thank you. If I completed 3 sciences already, I'm good, right? So years later, when I found myself teaching at the school that I graduated from, I thought to myself, I want my students to experience something different. And so when I started teaching at my former high school, I started creating opportunities for students to not only develop art in the classroom, but experience it outside of the classroom. And so as an artist, I took advantage of the times where I did exhibit in public spaces like self-help graphics and art. I would request buses from the facilities that were exhibiting and ask if they could bring my students to the exhibit. And so part of that, right, part of my own experience and my trajectory enabled me to think of giving my own students from the community that I grew up in a very different experience than what I had. Something else that I started developing was finding opportunities to collaborate together. And in this case, this was South Park for their first Dia de los Muertos. We took the opportunity to create a public display of it was a community altar, and we created mini shoebox altars, where we were able to display at the local park, right? So in this way, I wanted students to connect what they were doing and learning inside the classroom to their very own communities. Because we very well know that when the bell rings at 2 or 2:30 or 3 p.m., whatever students are doing at school, after the bell rings, they forget about it. And for me, I wanted them to continue making those connections in their own communities, in their home spaces. And lastly, after 5 years of teaching at my former high school, I developed an art program that enabled students to that gave students the option to take 4 years of art, as a freshman, sophomore, junior, and a senior. Introduction to art, painting, drawing, and AP art for their senior year. And so one of the things that I did after they submitted their AP portfolios, I wanted them to engage in service learning projects in their community. And so this last image that you see on the right with the rose and a picture of the students kneeling down in front of one of their murals. These are 2 murals that they proposed to local elementaries, and 2 of the elementaries agreed to the proposal. And so during the second part of the semester, their last semester, they started this project, and some of them went into the summer to complete them. The other one said, hey, school's over, I'm out. But just to kind of give you an idea of how I drew from my own experiences from the community that I grew up in, and understanding that dynamic, I developed something that that would allow students that were artistically inclined to have a portfolio ready for an art school that they would have wanted to apply as a higher education option. And lastly, this is another ideal example of how creating artwork that was telling a counter narrative of their own families, how they connected this to what was going on in their communities. And so this is an image from 2011, when SB 1070, Assembly Bill 1070 was passed and approved in the state of Arizona. And if you may recall, AB 1070 legalized racial profiling. It gave law enforcement the right to pull someone over if they looked illegal. And so part of that, I brought that conversation into the classroom. And there was a false narrative being portrayed in the media about immigrants, right? And so we took the opportunity to say, you know what? This is an immigrant sign that's visible near the US San Diego border on the 5 freeway. And we retold the story of what this image really means to students, right? And so we went to the May Day protest in 2011, and people were coming up to them asking them, what are these signs about, right? And they told the counter narrative of what it means to come from an immigrant family, what it means to be an immigrant and have aspirations, right? And all these false narratives or political agendas that were targeting immigrant families. And so throughout my graduate study, I came to identify this as creative resistance, right? Creative forms of expression used by students that resist or challenge oppressive structures, actions, and agendas that diminish the development of communities. Before I jump into this presentation even more, I did want to share that my critical perspective in education, not art education, just in education in general, was influenced by Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. One of the particular quotes that has propelled my philosophy is this quote that I'm showing you. Educators need to know what happens in the world of children with whom they work. They need to know the universe of their dreams, the language with which they skillfully defend themselves from the aggressiveness of their world, what they know independently of the school, and how they know it. I wanted to share this because I want everyone in attendance to recognize the privilege that we have as educators. Whether we grew up in a working class community or whether we grew up in a more affluent community, even someone like myself that graduated from the school that I taught in, I'm still coming in as an outsider with a privilege, an outsider that is being portrayed as the holder, the sole holder of knowledge in our classrooms. And so I say that because I want us all to recognize that the knowledge that we often ignore, we often overlook, that is being brought to our classrooms by our students. And so this quote just hit me so hard because we really do, before we teach anyone, before we come into these communities and teach anyone, we need to know about that community. We need to learn about the circumstances that that community is experiencing. And so I welcome everyone in attendance to push yourself to that. Know your students, know their dreams, know the experiences that happen outside of the school, because all that is brought into the school, but are we using it to develop their understanding of what we're teaching? Okay, so here are questions that I often thought about that I want you to also consider. What alternative art education methods, art or education methods, practices and spaces do educators use to connect learning to the homes of students? How could culturally relevant and education practices develop the engagement of students? Sometimes what we teach is disconnecting for them, and we need to admit that. Number 3, how could students use home knowledge to generate advocacy in their communities through creativity? Creativity doesn't have to be art related. So again, think about those questions. And again, I'm going to continue talking about the issues in art education that I took notes of through my own experiences as a student and as a graduate student. So through my work as a teacher and as a researcher, I found plenty of research that talks about how art education builds the academic involvement of students from any socioeconomic status. And I was delighted to find research like this. All right. What I've noticed, right, is that yes, okay, you have a point. Art improves the lives of students from any socioeconomic status. But art education research has also failed to recognize the socioeconomic limitations of arts programming that exist in working class schools that limit students' relevancy and access to the arts. And lastly, art education scholars do not present solutions for or recognize the disparity of arts access for working class students of color in underfunded schools. So if the arts do benefit students from all socioeconomic classes, what's happening in underfunded schools that don't have arts programming. Or maybe just offer one class. So again, these are problems that continue to influence the way that I was teaching. And so one of the things that I started doing is thinking about, okay, how can I connect the arts in a way that they'll draw on my students' experiences and knowledge that will develop their social consciousness. Because the reality of this is that I did not want to prepare students to be better artists. I wanted students to develop politically and consciously through the art making process. That to me was worth more than developing a student's artistic ability. So here are some of the objectives that I kind of started thinking about in my teaching approach. I want to be able to draw from students' home knowledge to develop relevancy, reading skills, writing skills, and creativity. I wanted to draw on students' knowledge to validate it as an asset and as a form of capital for their own learning. And lastly, drawing on the funds of knowledge to learn from students and develop relevant pedagogy. And this project that you're looking at, I'll dive into it a little bit more, but this is a family tree map where I had students interview their parents about how they ended up where they now live. Okay, technical difficulty here. But I also took the time in having students develop a representation of their parents' occupation as a way of understanding designing, elements of art, and principles of design. Okay, so at this point, I want you all to think about your favorite K through 12 project. If you can recall an assignment that made an impact on you in your K through 12 experience, I want you to think about that one now. And I also want you to think about these three questions. What was your project? What was a project from your K through 12 experience which had an impact on you? For whatever reason, you probably remember it, okay? First thing that popped into your head when I asked that. What details do you remember about this project? What knowledge that you knew did it draw on? So in other words, what knowledge that you knew from home did this project draw on, if any? All right, so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm gonna want to, I want you all to go into, I'm blanking out here, breakout rooms to have a discussion about a project that you did and what was it about, what subject was it? Was it elementary? Was it a science? Was it math? And just talk with each other about these projects. What do you remember about them? All right, everybody. So welcome back. I was able to drop into some breakout rooms. That was a lot of breakout rooms. But I don't want to speak for you all, but what I did want to do is if we can waterfall on the chat. And I'll start with a sample, right? I talked about my chemistry class, and my project was a 3D model of the elements krypton. So I'll start with that, right? If you can share the subject that this project was from, and then just share the project, what it was that made an impact on you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I did hear a lot of folks talking about that 4th grade mission project. History report on Tupac Shakur. A song that we found relevancy to. Country project, drawing of rainforest frogs. Sorry, y'all. Tree of Life in art class. Used over 25 pounds of clay. AP Physics. The planting beans project, and actually seeing and learning about growing with an actual plant, not from illustrations in a book. Creating a mug that reference our identity. Heritage report. You learned a lot about your family. Chris Kistner, thank you for that. 4th grade, winner of a painting contest. All right. So I'm sure you all had interesting conversations about your unique experiences, right, with these particular projects that you found some sort of interest in. And to some degree, whether you know what the funds of knowledge are or not, after we learn about what the funds of knowledge are, you're going to realize that what was intriguing about this project is that they were relevant to your experiences. So thank you everyone for that engagement. And we're going to revisit this question again. It's going to be parallel, not identical, but we're going to revisit this question again after we learn about our own funds of knowledge. Be prepared again. You're going to be taking notes. I'm going to be asking you all some questions because we're going to create an inventory of the funds of knowledge that we have individually. So let me share my screen again. Okay, and I did want to show you the card that was blocked off, and here it is, right? This was a project where I had students interview their parents about their occupations. Aside from students knowing, yes, my parent is a manager, my parent is this, my parent is that, they had to fully understand their work history that got them this position. And really, what do they do in a day, right? And then what do they do when they get home, right? So that they know that not only do they work during the day in an occupation, but then they get home and what else do they have to do? So again, the questions that you all kind of explore was what project, right, made an impact on you in your K through 12 experience. Some of you mentioned the subject, and some of you talked about why it was so impactful. And so here, I'm going to introduce the frameworks that have informed my teaching, right? And first and foremost, right, I know this is the first time I talk about the funds of knowledge, but I do want to give you an idea of what the funds of knowledge are. And we're going to dive into those a little bit more, right? So the three frameworks that you're going to see in a bit these are frameworks that have developed my approach to teaching. But first and foremost, we have the funds of knowledge. And the funds of knowledge are identified as the everyday practices and resources that are passed down to students from family households and are used as navigational purposes. I also draw on critical pedagogy, which I discussed earlier. And critical pedagogy uses the social political experiences of working class students to develop their social consciousness for social transformation. I've also drawn on critical race theory in education that acknowledges the oppressive aspects of society and education by exploring issues of race, class, and gender. Specifically, critical race theories recognizes the wealth that exists in communities through community cultural wealth that I will also be showing you in a bit. All right, so here's something that I want you all to think about. Do we know our students? Do we know our students' cultural background? And do we know their funds of knowledge? The funds of knowledge that they come from, that they come in with, that they bring to the classroom. And so here's another example, right, of that project where I had students interview their parents about their occupational history and how it helps the family. One of the things that I'm going to dive into now is what the funds of knowledge are. So the funds of knowledge scholars, right? Norma Gonzalez, Luis Moll, and Amanti in 2005 identified the funds of knowledge as the everyday practices and resources that are passed down to students from family households and are used as navigational tools. They also identified the funds of knowledge as the culture that exists in family homes. Because one of the things that I do want you to think about is that when we think about culture, we need to challenge this misconception of culture, that it's celebrated by fun, food, and festivals. And we really do need to challenge the misconceptions of culture through celebrated holidays like Cinco de Mayo and St. Patrick's Day. Those are false examples of culture. And again, through the funds of knowledge theory, right? The funds of knowledge scholars identified the everyday practices and resources that are passed down to students from family households and are used as navigational tools. And so specifically, they identify the funds of knowledge as skills, types of education, and I'm not talking about academic education. There's a particular education that we get at home. It has nothing to do with academics. Again, communication is a form of knowledge, funds of knowledge from home, especially if you speak a different language. Abilities, abilities that your parents have passed down to you. And practices, right? Familial practices that are generated in family households. So have you ever thought about what are our funds of knowledge, your individual funds of knowledge? And so this is where we're going to create an inventory of the funds of knowledge and what they are. So please take notes. I'm going to ask you some questions. You should be able to answer these questions individually. So please take your own notes. So what injury remedies do you know from home? And if I can remind everyone to please unmute, please mute yourself. Second question, what skills did your parents teach you? How did your parents help you academically? And again, there's a misconception sometimes that parents do not get involved in their children's education, but perhaps we can create those opportunities. What do you celebrate or do together with your family? if there's holidays that are specific to your ethnic background, that should be one example. And lastly, this is my go-to for every grade level. What occupations did or do your parents have? When you think about your parents' occupation, I often think about a job that my dad used to have, not the one that he has now, just because I felt I was really able to see his work ethic, especially when he worked for more than 10 hours sometimes. That's the job I remember him doing. But again, think of an occupation, right, that your parents had, because there's so much you can do with that topic when it comes to reading, writing, sciences, and mathematics. So again, quick answer to these questions. What injury remedies do you know from home? A very popular one is vapor rub. What skills did your parents teach you? My dad taught me how to drive. How did your parents help you academically? I have a story for that one, but it might take too long. We never celebrated Dia de los Muertos as a family. I started doing that as I got older, and now I do it with my students. So it's definitely something that I consider celebrating with students, which to me became family at one point. And again, what occupations did or do your parents have? Do we know as educators the backgrounds of our students? Do we know how many hours their parents work? Or are we judging their parents for not coming to parent conference night because they might be working? All right, so what we just did is we created an inventory of our own individual funds of knowledge. So going back to this, right? Going back to this question, I want you all to talk about the funds of knowledge that you bring from home. And I would like for you all to think about how can we use these funds of knowledge in our particular subject areas or grade level. Because I know there's a 5-paragraph persuasive essay that we're gonna have to do at a particular grade to meet the standards of the grade that we're focusing in. So again, this is the question that I'm gonna want you to think about in a group. What funds of knowledge, you came up with your own list, could we use to meet Common Core lessons? So I'm gonna stop my share. And if we can have a couple of minutes for that discussion in breakout rooms. All right, everyone. So I hope you all got to share some of the funds of knowledge that you all drew from home, and so maybe you didn't get to discuss how could we potentially use these knowledges in our very own classrooms. And this is something that I am going to want you to leave this workshop with, is how can we use the knowledges that students bring from home? In my group, in the group that I was in, we talked about one person mentioned their mom working at Sears as a phone operator, and their other parent was worked at a bakery. Someone else discussed how what their parents passed on to them was their work ethic. And then another person talked about they didn't remember what their parents taught them, but coincidentally, the parent was an artist, and so was the participant that shared. So what was passed down to you was this artistic ability that you experienced at home. So again, one of the things that I wanted you all to think about is how could we potentially use these experiences that students bring from home in our classrooms? Because if we were ever taught cooking by our parents before we left to college, there's a science to that. If we're teaching a science, there's a chemistry to cooking. There's mathematical opportunities to consider when parents' occupations measure everything through square footage. There's opportunities to learn about particular occupations and how they're related to engineering, to the sciences. English teachers, you should be taking notes of all of these topics because you can easily find topics in which you can have your students write persuasive essays about a subject or topic that's relevant to their own experiences and not what's assigned to us through the Common Core standards. So one of the things that I did want to do is choose one of the funds of knowledge that you talked about, and can we share it on the chat? What's a funds of knowledge that you understood as something that was passed down to you from home? So we can waterfall it on the chat and just kind of type it in. So mine was counting. I talked to my group about my mother giving me a jar of beans to learn how to count, and her arguing with my teacher because my teacher said she was not helping me by me using beans. And so as we waterfall our funds of knowledge on the chat, I'm going to go back to sharing my PowerPoint. So thank you all for sharing your funds of knowledge, sharing your experiences. So again, right, something as simple, right, as asking our students, what does a day in the life of your parent look like? And interview them about the occupations that they had or that they currently have. And what does a day look for them? Even if one of our parents stays at home, do not assume that's not a full-time job. Because I knew what that was when I grew up with my single mom. I knew that she got up at 4 a.m. to get to work at 6 a.m. before I drove her to work. And then I knew that when she got home tired, she still had to make something to eat for us. If she left at 4 in the morning, she made breakfast for us before she left to work, and she left it covered in foil so that it could be somewhat warm because we didn't have a microwave. But again, knowing what our parents do during the day for work and then knowing what they do when they get home from work could be a way to develop students' awareness and social consciousness of their family's social dynamics and financial stability. So again, just to reiterate the objectives of the funds of knowledge: to draw from students' knowledge, validate students' home knowledge as a form of capital, and draw on the funds of knowledge as a tool to develop relevancy through interdisciplinary subjects. We can use parental occupations in our math subjects. We can use it in our science subjects. We can use it in our English language art subjects. We can use it in our art subjects. Obviously, I'm showing it to you. History. And so my point is that we need to recognize the cultural wealth that exists in our classrooms, and drawing on community cultural wealth, right, through critical race theory, right? Community cultural wealth is identified by Tara Yoso as an array of 6 knowledges, skills, abilities, contacts used by communities of color to survive and resist racism and other forms of oppression. And so here are the 6 forms of capital. Aspirational capital. Have we ever asked our students through a project, what do you want to be when you grow up? Have we asked our students, what networks do we use in our community to access certain things, right? So aspirational capital, familial capital, social capital, right? What connections do we have that help us navigate socially? Navigational capital. How do we navigate spaces like college or academics or work or home or our community? And then there's resistant capital. When students advocate for communities or they advocate for particular elements for the well-being of their spaces. And there's also linguistic capital, right? It recognizes the various forms of communication, including code switching. Have you welcomed the foreign language that exists in student homes into your English classroom, into your science or math classroom, or into your traditional classroom? Welcome that language and recognize these forms of wealth that exist in our communities, community cultural wealth, welcome that in our classrooms, and find ways of connecting it to your own subjects. So again, at this point, right, I just want to share the ways in which I was able to use students' home knowledge in my own classroom to develop their understanding of not only art, the elements of art and principles of design, but also understand the social dynamics of their own family history, the social dynamics of their financial stability through their parents' occupations. And so here, for example, the family history map I had students do as high school students. This is what they identified in their reflection. I found out that my father helped run a store, sold and delivered merchandise. He also worked at a dry cleaning service, ironing dresses, and was a supervisor at a computer parts store. I also learned that my mother spoke Nahuatl, and she is now showing me how to speak it. I was grateful before, but not as grateful as today because I didn't know about the struggles that they had to go through in order to come here. So again, just using the funds of knowledge that students bring from home as a way to develop their understanding through the arts, through a writing assignment, by recognizing the science that exists at home, by recognizing the mathematics that exists at home. Again, many construction workers use square footage every day. So how can that not be connected to a math lesson at any grade level? The other thing that I like to do is I like to draw on previous knowledge. So I know that in the first grade, and in some instances in kinder, right, we get introduced to compound words. And I'm not exactly sure what grade levels you may introduce this in, but again, drawing on this idea of compound words, I have students play with this idea and creating visual compound words. And so here's some examples. You can do this at any grade level. This will really push the creativity in students, but also have them think in a scientific way that is creative. It's not possible, it's just creative. So surrealism compound words is what I call these, right? But I have them take a compound word like sunflower, and I have them deconstruct the word. What two words make up this compound word? So we have sun and we have flower, right? And normally, this is what the sun would look like. This is what a flower would look like. But what I ask students to do to develop their creative imagination is I tell them, if these two objects from this compound word were able to biologically reproduce, what would the offspring look like? And if you're a science high school teacher, you can use a Punnett square here to figure that out. But again, even if it's just at any other grade level or any other subject, how could these two objects, if biologically possible, create an offspring? And so this is the brainstorming sketch. All right, but what I'm going to show you is the final product of what students come up with. Not only do they creatively create a sun and a flower, but they also include a background, a context, either related to gardens or flowers or related to space, because obviously our sun is out in space. And again, visual compound words, drawing from the knowledge that they already know, right? Like compound words was something that could have been taught to them before at a lower grade level. And here's another one. Welcome the creativeness of students, right? Ball boy. And here's a sketch of if a ball and a boy biologically reproduced, the offspring would look like this. And again, it's a way for us as educators to really welcome the creativity and not limit, right? Because we can't tell students it's not biologically possible. Obviously, it's not biologically possible. But in order to develop imagination and creativity, let's give them that assignment. And it is difficult for some students because they've been conditioned to think that this is not possible. And it is only possible through imagination. So here's one way in which you can take English language arts, the idea of compound words, to create a visual representation of a compound word, and then have them reflect on how difficult this process was, or how it was that they thought about this in one way or another. Another example is introducing them to one-point perspective. At the high school level, this is very technical, but at the elementary level, this could be very simplified. One of the things that I welcome students to do is to assess their community. Assess an ideal community where they feel that the businesses in their community are going to benefit them 5 to 10 years from now. And so I often let them use their phones to Google their community. If they click on Street View, they're able to see the businesses that are there now. And this is also the opportunity that I took to explain to students why there were so many empty lots in South Central Los Angeles And it happened because of the 1992 riots. And students start making connections between the history of their community and the empty lots that exist there, or the businesses that are there now. But again, it's an opportunity for students to play the role of assessors and have a say in thinking about, do we really need this tattoo shop in our community? How is it helping us? Do we really need a smoke shop in our community? How is it going to help us 5 or 10 years from now? Through this assessment of the community, we found that on Central Avenue between Slauson and Washington, there were 26 fast food restaurants on Central Avenue, but no healthy supermarkets like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. So students were able to recreate an ideal community where they didn't have to travel 20 miles to go to the movies. They didn't have to travel 15 miles or to a better area in the community like USC to go to Trader Joe's, or to make sure that they go to Trader Joe's before 7 o'clock, because after 7 o'clock, they do not let outside community members into Trader Joe's, only USC students. So again, just thinking about some of the dynamics of their communities, do we know about them? And this is why we need to learn about the communities that we're teaching in before we teach students about what we want to teach them. So this is where I'm going to leave you with some questions for you all to think about before I close out this presentation. But at the elementary level, how can we draw on our own students, our own funds of knowledge, or students' funds of knowledge to meet our learning objectives? And at the elementary level, we can draw on parental knowledge, we can draw on home knowledge, we can draw on occupational knowledge, and use it for writing prompts. Use it to discuss some of the dynamics in our community. And use it for creativity in our specific subjects, whether it's the sciences, the English language arts, math, history, health. At the secondary level, we might, at higher level thinking, we might want to consider art and ethnic studies, right? And if you don't think that our parents' occupation or parents' occupational history is not ethnic studies, it is. Not only do students get to know about the diverse historic family histories that's existed in their communities, but they get to learn about each other's struggles. And that builds community in your classrooms. And most importantly, it builds trust between you and your students. You allow students to articulate, right, the socioeconomic circumstances of our society, and you're able to challenge or discuss issues of race, class, and gender that exist in our communities. And overall, in the K through 12 grades, English language arts is a must. Students can write artist statements. Students can write reflections. They can read their classmates' statements. They can write their own statements. They write artist statements. They write reflections to understand, again, the diverse forms of communication and the diverse experiences in the classrooms. There's 5-paragraph essays. There's persuasive essays. There's compare and contrast essays. There's foreign words that are not part of the English language that should be part of our education. Why shouldn't they be when there's so much diversity in our cities? And lastly, as an arts teacher, you just take these opportunities to develop students' understanding of the elements of art and principles of design by drawing on their home knowledge. Make it personal. Think about those experiences that you had in that particular project that you all shared out. What made it personal? What made it memorable? And try to create those lessons for your own students through this idea of the funds of knowledge. With that said, I would like to conclude this presentation by sharing that I dedicate this work to all those students who have had to struggle in their own educational trajectories. And I think of my students, past and present, and to their parents whose struggle is never ending. With that said, I'd like to say thank you. Here is my contact information and my Instagram page if you wish to follow. I usually share the work that I'm doing there, presentations that I have coming up. But at this point, we are opening it up for Q&A, and I will stop sharing my screen. I'd like to say thank you for everyone in attendance, and we're officially opening up a Q&A at the moment. Laura, would you like to transition us into this?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia, for sharing your story, for sharing your knowledge of the funds of knowledge. I love how you invited everybody to self-reflect on their own kind of home knowledges. It made me think about my upbringing in a different way and how I can bring that to students. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, let's definitely open it up for questions. You can use the raise hand function if you'd like, and just come on and ask. You can also put questions in the chat if you like.
I don't really have a question. I just want to say this was the most inspiring lecture. And I've attended these lectures for almost 6 months now. And this was very, it was very informative in how you illustrated our way of rethinking education and implementing it into the core standards. And I'm not even a regular teacher. I'm an after-school art teacher, but just the processes that you gave us is very inspiring, and I'm going to be sharing it with other teachers that I know. So thank you.
Thank you as well. I did want to share resources today. I couldn't get to that, but I will have Laura send out those resources and handouts and lesson plan ideas for everyone in attendance.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. Is it Saleh?
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Fidelina.
Hi,
thank you, Vanessa.
I have a question, Doctor. Will you be able to share the slides that you did today with us? I really like those questions that you asked us, like what you brought from your family, like what your parents are doing. So
yeah. So those are part of the resources that I will share. I am particular about sharing my slides just because I've been working on this for such a long time.
Sure. Yeah.
But
yeah, the resources.
But I will. But if you need my support, right? If you're trying to do something with your class, you can contact me and I will help you with that. And this goes to everyone. If you're trying to do some of this work on your own, and you have some questions for me on how to develop it, my email is open season.
Thank you.
We have a hand raised from Francisco Ortega.
Francisco, good to see you again.
Great to see you again as well, Dr. Garcia. So my question is, are you, did I understand correctly that you're currently teaching at the university level?
Yeah, I'm currently at Sacramento State, and so I'm teaching. I'm a professor of art education, so I'm preparing pre-service teachers.
That's awesome, and it's an honor. So thank you for facilitating the discussion today. I'm really inspired, and as I mentioned in one of our breakouts to you, and as I mentioned to another participant, I teach university freshmen, and actually in English. And so right now I was hearing a lot of what you were saying, and I was really following along, found that much relevant. What would you say is the intersecting point, I guess, in terms of any strategies that you would encourage us in the university setting? That being said, a lot of students, particularly I teach in Las Vegas, and so we can't ignore the fact that a lot of these students, there's a high acceptance rate to the university and a considerably low retention rate. And I think that's directly, well, at least it's associated with, being an MSI, HSI, and a really great diverse student body. A lot of students come in feeling unsure about their own positionality within the university. And so any professional development really that informs teaching to diverse student populations is something that I'm really interested in. What do you see as sort of strategies, anything that we can do as first year university instructors as students come out from these high school experiences?
Make their experience in your classroom memorable, personal. Yes, the classroom is where we build relationships, but outside of the classroom is where we sustain them. And I do as much as I can, not only inside of the classroom, but outside of the classroom as well.
Right.
And I'm talking about this in the context of both high school and the university setting. Because yeah, you could be a great professor in the classroom, but if students don't remove that invisible wall of you being the educator versus you being the educator that's building community with them outside, sharing their struggles, whether it be demonstrations or having your office open for office hours, even when you don't have office hours, just have your office open or your classroom open, is a welcoming element, I think. There's not enough professors that think in this way. And I think you need to build that community also with your colleagues at the university level and say, hey, we need to build a community for our students, for students of color, for students that are going to need us. Even if it's not for students of color, right? But students that need your support. Because a lot of professors, let's keep it real, and teachers, as soon as the bell rings, they're out. Where as soon as they're done with their classes, they're not available. And so I hope that was a good answer for you, Francisco.
No, definitely. Thank you. Then I'm fairly new to this as well. And so just, also first generation student and now educator. And so it's very, very helpful hearing this experience. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. And I know, Oliveira, you had a question?
Yes. First off, thank you. It's really nice to see you again. And thank you for this presentation. Something that I'm curious to hear your thoughts about is what I hear from a lot of like secondary students, like high schoolers, college students, and then adults, especially for first and second gen, like people of color, children of immigrants, is that they never really see arts as like a viable thing to explore as an adult for a career. And then that creates a sort of hesitation to pursue the arts in any sort of form. So as arts educators or as educators who are interested in the arts, what is sort of our role, in your opinion, in creating a culture that promotes not just the commodification of arts, but like arts as healing, arts as exploratory, arts as creative, even outside of a career?
Yeah, well, let me share, that when I became an art teacher, I wanted all my students to become artists, right? It was my instinctive intuition, right? As an artist, as a creative myself, my students had fun in my class. And then I realized not all of them want to be artists. Chill out. That's when I started kind of rethinking what should be my goal then. And my goal was always for them to use the arts to develop their knowledge of other subjects. So if I can teach them to think creatively, not only artistic through the arts, but think creative. I mean, let's think Leonardo da Vinci. This guy was a scientist. He was an artist. He was an engineer. Why? Because his creativity allowed him to think in so many different ways, not with tunnel vision, which is how we're expected to teach through our own subjects. This is what you need to learn, right? And what's in this window is art, right? Or what's in this window is science. So I think that as art educators, we need to use the arts to help students think creatively through interdisciplinary subjects. And our goal should not be to develop the artistic ability of our students. It should be part of it, but we should also build the consciousness of students and help them think creatively as mathematicians, as engineers, as scientists, as lawyers, as historians, as mechanics, if they want to be a mechanic, right? And so that's my answer for you. And again, it's just my opinion.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Garcia, there was one question in the chat from Kelly Williams. If you have students that are unhoused or whose families are between work, do you still ask about family jobs, or is there a way to reframe that question that is inclusive?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a way. And again, this is why you need to get to know your students, because you may be asking them to describe their room, and they might live in a studio with their 5 family members and they don't have a room, right? So yes, there's ways of reframing that, which is why we need to get to know our students. And so one thing that I ask often is either interview one of your parents about their family history or interview someone close to you about their family history or about their occupation. And so, yes, I've had circumstances where I have been aware that some students don't live at home. Some students live in a car. Some students live somewhere else. And then I know that there's students that come from foster homes. And so, yes, we need to modify this, but again, we need to welcome their knowledge in a way where they feel safe. And so we can't, from one day to the next, come in and say, hey, tell me about your parents. We have to build that trust first. Meeting them at the door and asking them, hey, how was your weekend? Or good morning. Things as simple as that build trust in our classrooms. And acknowledging students, like I said, outside of the classroom, if they're involved in sports, if they're involved in some sort of collegiate team like debate, or if they're selling cupcakes, if their club is selling cupcakes, go support. They're going to appreciate that much more and respond to you more in the classroom. And I'll close with this, right? I know this has nothing to do with your question, but one time I really ethically considered going to a quinceañera that a student invited me to. Long story short, I went. I met so many parents because there were so many students there. And the following week at school, there were so many students participating in class and students acknowledging me that weren't even in my class. Like saying, "Hey, Mr. Garcia, how you doing?" Wasn't even in my class, but they saw me at that celebration. So this is what I mean. Engage with your students outside of the classroom, and that maintains relationships. You can build relationships in your classroom, but maintaining them happens outside.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. I think we'll end with that. I hope everybody has a great night. And if you didn't get a chance to fill out the survey, I'm putting the link in the chat one more time. We'd love to have your feedback. Any final words, Dr. Garcia, before we sign off?
Thank you all. If you have any questions for me again, please reach out to me. I will support and help you develop some of these ideas for your particular class. Thank you for taking the time today after a full day's of work to be here, listen to me and my experiences. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Good night.